Good morning. I'm Eileen O'Reilly, the president of the National Press Club and managing editor of standards and training at Axios. I wanted to give a quick but sincere thank you to our events and our professional development teams, as well as our nonprofit affiliate, the National Press Club Journalism Institute, who support important topic-focused discussions such as this one. I'd also like to express my gratitude to our NPC member programming director, Cecily Scott Martin, and our AV team for helping organize this event. I'm happy to see many of you here this early morning, and I know many have joined via the live stream. Please write your questions if you are here on the cards placed on the chairs, legibly so I can read them, and we will pose as many as possible to our panelists. So, we're all here to talk about a big issue in our journalism industry, news deserts. News deserts, both in regional areas that lost their newspapers and in communities that tend to be underserved by the media overall, are vastly growing and have a multifold impact. Evan Smith, senior advisor to the Emerson Collective and co-founder of the Texas Tribune, recently pointed out some terrifying figures. Since 2005, a quarter of the nation's newspapers have shut down. By 2025, it's expected to be a third of all newspapers. There are 70 million people, a fifth of the nation's population, who live somewhere with no source of local news or one on the verge of going away. Many of these are in communities of color. The reasons this is so important are many, and they are why I think this has a direct impact on our democracy. People in news deserts do not have access to the information they need to make informed decisions. Leaders tend not to be held accountable for their actions as they no longer have that key oversight from journalists. Communities of color or underrepresented groups often do not have their stories or concerns told unless they are connected to a big and often negative event. People live in their bubbles and are inundated by misinformation and disinformation that fills the journalism void. And this is expected to get worse with generative AI if limitations are not imposed. But there is some good news. There's a growing number of institutions and individuals who are trying to change what's happening and are testing out different models to see what can actually work in an industry hurt by the drop in advertising dollars. One growing way that news deserts are being addressed is through the university and college programs that pinpoint gaps in nearby coverage and work with their journalism students to address these gaps. Poynter had a recent opinion piece that describes some of these efforts. For instance, Poynter mentioned that the Community News Service at the University of Vermont, which hired a professional editor to work with their journalism students in liaison with 14 local media partners. They now co-publish 300 print, audio, and video pieces a year at no cost to those outlets. And the Center for Community News at the University of Vermont has found at least 120 programs in the US that pair journalism students with local outlets to help fill that news gap. Well, this is definitely a win-win scenario for both the students who get these valuable clips and learn on the ground techniques and skills, and for the communities affected by those news deserts. These programs also involve programming and time and money dedicated toward those efforts on the part of the university at a time when every dollar counts. I'm very thrilled we have 4 esteemed academics here to talk about how their universities are addressing these news deserts and actually having an impact. Gracie Lawson-Borders is Dean and Professor of the Kathy Hughes School of Communications at Howard University. She is a member of the Policy Board of the Howard Journal of Communications, an editorial board member for the International Journal of Media Management, and an advisory board member for blackpast.org at the University of Washington. She is a 2022 recipient of the Spirit of Diversity Award from the Journalism Institute for Media Diversity at Wayne State University. She's also been on the faculty at the University of Wyoming, Kent State University, and Southern Methodist University. She's a former journalist who worked as a reporter and editor at the Akron Beacon Journal, the Oakland Press, and the Chicago Tribune. She'll talk about Howard University's robust journalism program and how the students' work is often showcased on the Howard University News Service, or HUN's, website. HUNS partners with more than 200 Black press outlets across the country through the National Newspaper Publishers Association, or NNPA. Jerry Zremski, a former president of the National Press Club and bureau chief for the Buffalo News, became a lecturer at the University of Maryland's Philip Merrill College of Journalism in 2022. Zremski was brought in as director of the college's new local news network, which aims to bolster local news coverage throughout the state of Maryland. He also serves as a faculty advisor to the college chapter of NLGJA, the Association of LGBTQ Journalists. Zremski has also been named a faculty champion by the Center for Community News at the University of Vermont for his proposal to explore development of a Maryland Commons, an effort to collect and make state data easier to use for journalists across the state. Born in Puerto Rico, Patricia Guadalupe, a member of the National Press Club, is a bilingual, multilingual journalist based in Washington, D.C., covering the capital for both English and Spanish language media outlets in print and broadcast, including NPC Latino, Latino Magazine, and NPR's Latino USA, in addition to being a copy editor at my outlet, Axios. Guadalupe also has had positions with WTOP Radio in D.C., WKAQ Radio in Puerto Rico, and has reported for CBS News Radio and financial outlets. She is the past president of the D.C. chapter of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists and an editor and translator at its national newsletter. She is also an adjunct professor at American University School of Communication and at Florida International University's Semester in Washington Journalism program, where the students cover D.C. for a Hispanic and Latino audience. Last but not least, Terry Finneman is here from Kansas, where she's an associate professor of journalism at the University of Kansas and publisher-founder of the Eudora Times. She is the executive producer of the Journalism History podcast and chairwoman of the Journalism History Journal. She's the author of The Press Portraits of Women Politicians, 1870s to 2000s, and co-editor of Social Justice, Activism, and Diversity in U.S. Media History. Next year, look out for her latest book called Reviving Rural News. Finneman got her start in journalism at weekly newspapers in western North Dakota and was a political reporter for the Fargo Forum, working her way up to be a Kaplan Fellow with Sam Donaldson at ABC News. She has long credited her entire career to her start at weeklies. A decade after the fall of the legacy paper in Eudora, Finneman was able to evolve her class project into a full-out online newspaper, the Eudora Times, with students covering the city commission, school board, businesses, sports, and more. Let's give a thanks and welcome to our panelists. So I thought maybe we'd just start with first describing what programs we have at your school and when it started and what the details are.
Okay, so I'll try to do a quick little history lesson here. First of all, thank you and good morning everyone, and thank you to the National Press Club for putting on an important panel like this. I think I'll start with the Cathy Hughes School of Communication started right after the Kerner Commission report in '68 and was founded with the original dean of Tony Brown, formerly of Tony Brown's Black Journal. And so there's kind of a history of the university starting to get students of color involved in media after what we saw with all the riots across the country in the '60s. And someone said, hey, let's take a look at this, and here goes the Kerner Commission. And so one of the things that's been unique about the program at Howard is a continued push to prepare these journalists to go out, Black journalists and really all journalists who come to the school, because we have everybody at the school, is to say that you have a purpose here. You really are what so many of our faculty would tell them, you're the first, version of history that comes out, because you're doing this real time. And so about 2001, after several years of graduating many notable journalists that we can speak of right now, but in 2001 is when Howard University News Service started. And it was originally called blackcollegenews.com. And really what it was to have students go out and cover, particularly thinking of local communities that weren't receiving coverage, as well as national coverage from here. And what it's blossomed to with the partnership, not only with the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which goes out on a wire, so this is totally a student-run news wire under the leadership of the faculty and some professionals in the community, is that they are covering this, that we send out on the wire, multimedia stories. And what that has done and how it's manifested over time is that it's been able to reach so many places because of the Newswire, where we've gained more and more partners. We even have Washington Post as a partner. We have theroot.com as a partner. The Onion, I mean, just several people have joined us to catch this stuff on the wire. And so the students are going out. And during the pandemic, what was really fruitful is they were back in their hometowns. And so again, so I think what is so important about this panel today is to see all the efforts being made to say, you know, I don't want to quote Jefferson wrong, but I think he said something to the nature of, to maintain a democracy, you have to have an informed populace. And we cannot let misinformation and disinformation and lack of information continue to impact people in some of these communities, which most numbers are saying around about 70 million people really don't have a local news source. So it's important.
Great, thank you. Jerry?
Hi, I'm Jerry Zaremski. It's good to be back here at the Press Club, as always. I joined the University of Maryland full-time about 15 months ago to lead what's called our local news network. And essentially what I was asked to do, what I've ended up doing, is turning our sophomore level journalism class, the second writing class that students take, into kind of a giant hyper-local news bureau for the entire state. And this works in a few different ways. For one thing, in this class, students have a clip requirement. They're supposed to get 6 clips during the semester. So what I do is I try to pair them with local news outlets around the state, preferably their hometown news outlet whenever possible. Beyond that, we try to do a project every semester where we do something that really the news outlets in the state can't do on their own. So for example, last fall we did a voter guide to all the school board elections in the state of Maryland. We had our students vet the candidates, check their court records. We found a dozen of them who didn't pay their taxes on time. We found a family values candidate who stole her mom's ID and a lot of stuff from Target too. So in other words, if only George Santos had just run for the school board in Maryland, we would have found him. Our other projects have included a look at school funding or school spending statewide, and right now we're taking a look at the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is this gigantic education reform plan. The third prong of what we're doing is we're doing a news ecosystem study. We're taking a very close look at the news outlets that exist in Maryland in hopes of finding where news outlets don't exist and where the news deserts are. And we're going to be releasing a survey that'll be part of that in just a few weeks. And we hope to publish that sometime early next year and have a conference around it so that people from other universities might want to take a look at our work and maybe replicate it in their state.
Excellent. Hi, thank you for having me. Patricia Guadalupe here, and good morning. And I want to mention George Santos's story was first picked up by a local newspaper that nobody paid attention to until the New York Times picked it up. And this is why I think it's really important to talk about news deserts. And a slight plug to Axios. One of the reasons that it's doing so well is because it's filling in a lot of those gaps in local coverage. My experience at American University, we have students from all over the country and all over the world, and they bring a different kind of context to what the news is. When you talk to students from Latin America and Europe, Asia, they're all interested in what's going on here, but they have a different perspective. And the same thing with the program at Florida International University. I'll give you a perfect example of what's in the news and how it was covered. What Senator Menendez yesterday said, the reason that I am storing all of this money in my house is because Cuba is coming after my family. But I didn't see anywhere where it said that his family came to the United States way before Castro did, and that he was actually born here in the United States. So his family didn't flee anything. For them to have that particular fear on top of, forget about the fact that he's a member of the banking committee and he doesn't trust the banking industry here. So you have that particular context that having other perspectives bring to news coverage. And I tell my students, don't pay attention to any of the, oh, the news media is falling apart, the newspapers are closing, blah, blah, blah. Especially if you speak another language. There are opportunities out there, and especially on the local level, there are many opportunities. I mean, when I was in school, online was a tiny little thing, but 90% of what I do is online right now, so you never know where this is going to take you. And so speaking in the present tense about something that may happen in the future, I tell students, you just never know. And all of them are very interested in what's going on. The students at Florida International University's Washington program spend a semester here going up to Congress, talking to the federal agencies. And one of the things that they walk away with after they leave is they have no fear of public officials, which a lot of people don't realize, that public officials take advantage of that, you know, that we think that they're higher up kind of things. But here in Washington, you can run into them at the supermarket, or you see them outside running around. And so I tell the students, you know, they're just like us. Mm-hmm. They just happen to be elected. And so don't think that because they're a member of Congress or on the Supreme Court or in the federal agency or even the president, that they're any different from us and that you shouldn't cover them. So.
I'm Terry Finneman. I am the founder and publisher of the Eudora Times. I started working at the University of Kansas around 2019 and somehow found out that the community of Eudora, which is about 15 minutes or less from Lawrence, didn't have a newspaper. And this is a town of 6,500 people, and I'm from a town of 2,500 people. So to me, 6,500 people is a large town. And so I could not believe that a community of this size didn't have its own newspaper. I am a solutions solver kind of gal, as is my family. And so I just thought it was terrible. This town didn't have a newspaper, so I decided I would solve this problem myself. So reached out to City Hall, had some conversations with them that we were interested in doing this. They were very, very supportive. Eudora had lost its newspaper during the Great Recession. They didn't have local news for 10 years before my students and I stepped in. And it started very small. I often tell people I would get an F in business school. We had no business plan. There was no thought whatsoever to what we were doing. We just saw a problem and said, let's just start doing some stories about this town. Put together a Wix site called the Eudora Times just to put up a story, and we've just kind of built the plane while flying it since then. We've existed now for over 4 years. I now have a team of 5 students, and then the 6th is a Poynter Koch Fellow. So one of my students who had been with me for a year graduated in May. We got Poynter Koch funding, so she is now my full-time managing editor and staying with us for another year. This is the first year that we have been open year-round. We used to only operate during the 16 weeks of the semester. We'd close Christmas break, we'd close during the summer. We just did what we could. So we've seen quite a difference in what we're able to do now that we have a little bit more funding. We are 100% donation funded. I know we're going to talk about funding more as the panel goes on. And so we tell the community, you know, we rely on you to keep us going. We are very, very connected to the community. So very different from the typical status quo kind of legacy media where, you know, we're putting out stuff and you just better like it. We work the opposite of that. We work ground up. So when we first started, we had a town hall at City Hall and had people come in. This, of course, was during the era when we were enemies of the people, right? That was fun times. And so it was important to us to have a town hall to meet with people, for them to come in and ask us questions. significant lack of trust in media. Eudora is a more conservative community. They were very concerned we were going to be a partisan outlet. We were frequently asked, why are you here? Like, you know, these little towns, you know, it's like they don't feel like anybody cares about them. And so, as a result, we have been very, very focused on our community and very focused on what do you care about, what do you want us to cover. So we have a senior citizen beat. That is an actual beat on my team.
Wow.
Because the senior citizen community is very active and strong. So we go every month to their little club meeting. You know, they show off their quilts and their woodworking, right? None of this is newsworthy with a capital N, but this is what's important to my town. So that's what we cover. Now, we also cover, you know, city council and school board, library board, all those kinds of things. But we also really focus on just the small kind of feature stories that are really important to our people.
I think that's really important to talk about, you know, who your audience is and who you're trying to reach. Can we talk about a little bit like what you see during your, you know, experiments? What do you see working well and what has not worked well? Do you want to start, Gracie?
That's a good question. I think what we just heard, which was a very passionate sharing of the start of something and why it exists, I think that's what works. I think getting students involved and getting professors and other people in the industry involved who care, then that's what works. And I think that's what makes it able to regenerate itself. So when we listen, you know, in Maryland, you know, covering local news and, you know, finding out one of the candidates is doing a little everything under the sun. And I lived in a small town for years when I'm working at the University of Wyoming in Laramie, Wyoming. And people care. They have things that are important. You know, trust me, cattle was very important in Wyoming. Very important. And economically as well. So that's what we try to show students. Don't underestimate, you know, if you really want to do this and be a part of this, and it's important to be a part of journalism, is don't underestimate what that little something in the back of your head or scratching on your neck, it is a story, it's important. When we saw the change in Wyoming and Colorado, where a lot of the ranches now have become corporate, that was a big deal to people because these were formerly families for generations that owned this property. And there was one landowner that kind of went from where we were at the university all the way into Colorado almost for all the land that they had received. So we try to tell the students everything has some tie to folks, and that's what you want them to do. That's why I think it's so important to have this conversation, is because we have to counter all this misinformation and disinformation so people know what's my lived experience. And so when you have a passion and a commitment to it, that's what I'm seeing. And when some of these students, you know, hear back from their stories landing in different places on the news service, they've had an impact, you know, they've had a reach. And I think that's what I see when they start to, you want to call it that aha moment and realize that was an important story I was supposed to capture. That was something that happened, you know, when you live in large communities, you think things are a given. You live in a DC or a Chicago, but they're not even a given in those spaces because there are a lot of people who don't get information. So when we get everyone to see, and we're similar in how we run the program, but most of the students who are by their junior, senior year are really doing a lot of this work, and then they're seeing and hearing back, you know, from what has occurred. And I think that gets them to realize, you know, this is important. These are things people need to know so they can counter, you know, because some days I sit there and I was like, really, nobody's believing this, are they? And then I was like, is somebody going to go out there? Because people often ask me, you know, do you miss being in day-to-day journalism? But it's usually once there's something breaking and you're like, nobody's actually believing that. So you have to get the students to have that itch where they realize, I have to hunt this story down. Why is this building vacant? Why is something not occurring here anymore? You know, what happened to this town? And so you want them to see that that's what we're pushing. And then it's the partnerships that we make with Access and all the other places and the Pulitzer Center that also regenerates that, and Pointer. And so I think what it is we have to keep getting them to see that what they're doing serves a very important purpose if people are to understand their lived experiences. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to function? You know, what makes, you know, the water, when I turn it on and the faucet turns on? Because when it doesn't turn on, guess what? You got a problem.
Yeah, I think what doesn't work saying a little bit about what you're saying is reporting on the same thing that everybody else is doing. And that's one of the things that I always tell the students is before you sit down and write anything, who is your audience? And we compare the same story in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times is still going to have a different angle, even though those are mainstream major newspapers. And then we look at how it's covered in some of the foreign papers or foreign media, Spanish language media here in the United States. I mean, the Republican presidential primary, the debate tomorrow includes a moderator from Univision. And you know that the reason that they did that is because they're trying to get that Latino vote, which is up for grabs, you know, depending on who you talk to. And so that is one of the things that a lot of the political groups understand perfectly well, but a lot of the media organizations still have a lot of catching up to do on that. And so one of the things that I make sure to tell the students when you're out there reporting on stories and writing about things and talking to people, that you get that different perspective that nobody else is going to have. Because why am I going to read the same thing that you wrote that somebody else already did? So that's what I always say. Make sure that there's something there that nobody else would have.
I think that what really works is when we can combine real journalism with a teaching moment. So when we have students do the court record search of candidates, or for example, in our spring project, we gave all of our students a spreadsheet of 2 years worth of school expenses, contracts in various districts. And we found, you know, one student's eyes light up. That district spent $25,000 at a jewelry store. You know, things like that. That just really impresses upon students that it's not just a spreadsheet. There's news buried in that spreadsheet. So as long as you can do things like that, I think this really works. What doesn't work sometimes, frankly, is that there's kind of this combination between very young journalists who are just beginning and who are probably a little bit shyer than I was at the same age, maybe because they were holed away inside for a couple of years during the pandemic, and a cadre of public officials that may not be as used to questions and may be wondering, why is this college journalist calling me? So we've run into little tensions there where public officials have not been as responsive as I would like them to be.
Yeah.
So from a logistical standpoint, what's great about running a newsroom out of a university is that I already have a building that I don't have to pay for, right? Just those basic foundations, right, that are difficult startup costs for somebody to start a newsroom, right? So my dean let us put our Eudora Times logo in my office, and we have a large table for my team to meet around. So we have a building. We have a steady stream of staff who are coming through. We have multimedia equipment in the journalism school that we don't have to pay for. It's already there, right? I don't have to pay health insurance, right? So all of those huge startup expenses we don't have to deal with as a newsroom being part of the university. Some of the challenges, though, that come with it, number one, you need to have a faculty member who goes above and beyond to be able to do this, right? So I'm technically research faculty. My job is to do research for the university. So the work that I do for the Eudora Times, virtually all of it is volunteer work that I'm not getting paid to do. I do it because it's important to me to do this. So the Eudora Times has differed over our years. We started out just basically kind of as a club. It was just me and some of my students who had been in my reporting class who just were like, this is really important. And we just met together on our own to do this. For 2 years, we were part of a class. There's pros and cons to being part of an actual class. The pro is that you have a team of people who are there, who are required to work for you, right? But for anybody who's done teaching, you also know that there are people in the class who are just there to check a box, right? Which can be a problem when you're trying to run a real business and you don't have when you have half-hearted buy-in, I should say, and copy that requires significant work, or copy that isn't turned in on time because they're a kid, you know, in its college, right? So we are now back to being a club again, which is just a team of very committed people who are very passionate and care about this, students who are part of the team. So, so there's different logistical hurdles that are involved when you're doing it as part of a university.
I don't recall ever running late with my story this college. Just kidding. Well, let's use this to start talking about fundraising and how you actually fund this program and what kind of lift it is for the faculty to actually do this.
Well, the American University Communications Department has a lot of resources that some other universities don't have, and so they're able to get a lot of studio equipment and make the student newspaper is there's a student radio station, so it's run in a very typical university kind of setting. The Florida International University Washington program is also funded through some very committed people in Miami who feel that it's really important to have a presence here in Washington to see how policy affects the state and the residents, and especially now with the state governor running for president, it's even more important. So the funding comes through several sources, including the university itself that is very committed to having this kind of program here. It's only been here 5 years, and it's growing in that the number of students that want to come here and spend a semester here, a lot of them end up staying and getting internships elsewhere or jobs here because they become fascinated with the whole political process, which is kind of cool. That some of their families are not happy that they want to stay, but they're once they send pictures of them inside the Capitol and the Congress, you know, that impresses their parents, so that helps.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
The program I run was funded by a grant from a family foundation, two wonderful philanthropists here in DC who noted the crisis in local news and wanted to do something about it. So that's kind of the start. My role in terms of fundraising is fairly small. I'm there when I'm needed. We have a full-time fundraising person on staff at Merrill College, and what we're going to be looking to do, obviously, over the long run, is expand our local news footprint. There's all sorts of possibilities out there, especially with the Press Forward money, which I'm sure some of you have heard about, this gigantic investment in local news that's coming from the Knight and MacArthur Foundations over the next couple of years. So I think a lot of us probably have in the back of our mind in terms of fundraising, the question is just stay tuned. Let's see what happens these next couple of years.
Yeah, one of the things that FIU is doing is, in terms of expanding the Spanish language coverage on their website. On the Kaplan, it's called the Kaplan News Service as part of FIU. And there are dedicated fundraisers here in DC and also in Miami to push that further, and to have several of the students are bilingual, completely bilingual, so they're writing their stories in both English and Spanish and doing videos of it too. So that's one of the things that the college is looking at very seriously. And I've been talking to AU about that. You know, we need to do the same thing, and hopefully that'll get to some fruition at some point. Oh,
That'd be good.
Well, it's I can connect it all to say it's the passion, it's the commitment, and it's the funding. And we've been fortunate in terms of always looking for funding in addition to what we do as the university, We've been fortunate to be one of the places that the Correct Newmark Fund supports. We've applied for grants with Solutions Journalism, partner with the Pulitzer Center. So it's ongoing. So I'm going back to something was said earlier, that it becomes, faculty also are committed to it and passionate about it. And so they're going the extra yard. And so you're always looking for funding. And this planned funding coming forward from Knight and MacArthur in that effort to support local news will be a part of it. You know, we've done things with Kellogg grants to be able to do some health communication work with students, pairing with Morgan State University. We have a memorandum of understanding with Emerson in Boston, where when their students come for their fall semester or semester in Washington, D.C., they can take classes with us and participate in our classes, can do the same. Our students can take classes at their LA campus and participate. So it's a lot of partnership and collaboration, and I'm gonna say like-mindedness. So for those of us who care about this, as universities, we also are looking to partner with people in industry, and I think that's been a benefit, to give opportunities, because you're so on point. Once students get that experience and realize that they're moving along, so we have News Lab is our capstone kind of for the print and multimedia students, and News Vision is for the broadcast students. And then the digital journalism kind of goes across it. So those students are being set up that this is what you're going to do. And yes, you're going to have politicians try to push back, but that's why we've been preparing you that as public servants, guess what? You get to push back too.
Right.
Because this is important information. There is the aha moment when you look in documents, and that's the part as an administrator that I miss in the newsroom, is when you get students to see, and you were like, it was always there.
Right.
It was always there. That's what we were preparing you, and that's why it's important for you to get this information for a public to understand what is occurring, you know, to look at your roads and why you need roads that you can actually drive on. You know, all of those things, it comes to bear. And so you're always looking for funding, and you're looking for people who understand the importance of talking about the fourth estate and why it's there to watch the others, and help us understand that the way this works is everybody has a role in it. And so, yes, we talk about funding all the time. You know, how can we do this? How can we, or who can we partner with? Who can we go in and do this with together? So I think collaborating is also a part of it. But it warms me to hear not only my fellow panelists up here talk, but know other things that are happening at, you know, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, know things that are happening, you know, at Medill and other places where beyond Kansas and everyone, where some people are really realizing here's an opportunity to not only cover this news, but use this teaching tool and this teaching moment to prepare people to ready themselves to keep doing this, so this doesn't get lost, so they don't understand, so they don't just listen to, oh, newspapers or this, and think it stops. It's no, we still need the information.
Right.
We do, and then we have to have ways to pay for it, and that's why we look for these different ways to make sure we can have experiences to support it.
So I'm very jealous of my fellow panelists. I started with $0. I did not have a single dime when I started this project. We really had no money at all our first year. I have had to scrap for every single dime that I've brought into my newspaper. We are 100% donation funded, and so I have done tons of public speaking around Eudora. Next week, I'm talking to the Lions Club. We're hosting the chamber meeting. We're talking at the community festival. It is boots on the ground asking for money. I've learned to sell ads myself as well, and gone into the advertising realm, selling print ads as well. It's been a challenge. It's been a challenge. We did, after about a year, get our foot in the door with KU Endowment to allow us to open a bank account, essentially, in endowment. So any donation that we get is therefore a tax write-off for anybody who gives us money. And I've had many, many conversations with the journalism school's endowment gal. So as she's going around the country talking with alumni, she's letting them know what we're doing. So to this point, we're 4 years in, and we've brought in about $75,000, with 60% of that coming from Eudora residents and 40% of that coming from journalism alumni who are supporting what we're doing. Just this year, we finally got Pointer Coke money, but we had to match that, right? So I had to claw and stress to get every dime to be able to match the money I needed to give for that. Just this year, we're now able to dip into some Knight Foundation money. But it has been very, very difficult for me because we are an official newspaper of the Kansas Press Association, but we're part of KU. So I'm not an actual small business that has filed paperwork with the Secretary of State, right? I'm not like a real newspaper. So I have had dozens and dozens of calls trying to find money for my publication that I don't qualify for because I'm not a really small business, so I don't qualify for like real small business money. I'm also not really a nonprofit because I'm just part of KU, and KU's endowment is a nonprofit, but I'm not really my own nonprofit. And so we really fall through the gaps. When I look at the huge Excel spreadsheet that I'm sent of, oh, here's all the places with money. You know what they want? Oh, do a big healthcare project. We have funding for that. Do a big investigative project. Do this special niche thing. I'm covering the cross-country team. I'm covering the 65th high school reunion that some people in their 80s had at Perkins last week. I'm covering city council, right? There is not funding to cover basic things that real people care about. It's always, oh, you got to do this special project that has this huge impact. I'm just trying to do everyday journalism and serve a community. And so funding has been a challenge, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
But that's a good point she makes, why I think some of this coming forward with hopefully what Knight and MacArthur is going to do is going to be important.
Oh, I'm signed up to get their alerts.
Very good. Because that's what I think is the point you're making, is that it's about the audience, and you're writing for an audience. And so it's not the time to do, the great splash on, opioids if that's not what's impacting your community. So you want the support for that. I think there's something came out in Forbes about a week or so ago, again, talking about some folks who want to support, local news. And so, I'm an advocate for that key word that was set up here is the audience.
Mm-hmm.
What perspective, what's going to matter in Rawlins, Wyoming is going to be different than in Paducah, Kentucky, or at the Eudora Times. And that's what I want us not to lose sight of with local news. That's the whole point of it. For you to get up, if you're in Minnesota in a small town, weather means everything to you. Mm-hmm. And so you want the stories to help you understand and, what's being put out on the road and what's different so that you can travel and get forth. So I want audiences to know that that's what the whole point is to help you understand that world around you. And of course, we're also sharing those other things that they need to know, like we don't want to shut down this weekend. A federal shutdown of the government. So yeah, we talk about that, but we talk about how it impacts you in your community. Right. What does it mean if you can't clear the roads? What does it mean if the water plant can't function? But it's also it's important not to lose sight of the funding is to make sure that we can hear, read, and receive this in this many platforms. That's the beauty that's here now. So we don't have the barriers to entrance of if you don't have a printing press, then you of course are not going to be a Chicago Tribune. Now we can go to the net and provide. And I think you're doing a wonderful service to the community for them to be able to say, I can look and hear something about where I'm at and help me understand what I'm doing here. And that's what I hope we don't lose in this whole purpose of pushing to make sure we try to minimize these news deserts.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to add one thing that combines kind of the last two questions. When we talk about logistics, when we talk about funding, we really need to understand Generation Z and the huge pressure that they are under. Okay, these kids have significant student debt. They are going to school 40 hours a week. They're having to work at a restaurant or bar 20 to 40 hours a week. And then my kids are volunteering for basically pennies to work for the Eudora Times. I mean, it's phenomenal what these kids are doing and what they're having to do, which is why I scrap for every dime. I don't take a dime of the money that comes in the door. I give it all to the kids. Any dime that I get, I give to my kids, because we have got to have funding. So yeah, I talk about, it's great, you have the steady stream of kids, right? But they got to get paid, right? I want them to give up the job at the restaurant so I can pay them to just work for me. They are under a tremendous amount of stress.
Yeah.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the, a recent graduate of the AU School of Communication is the co-founder of Pay Our Interns, which is an organization that actually lobbied successfully to get the White House Congress, the State Department, and they're working on other federal agencies to actually pay people. Because, you know, the cause does not pay the bills.
That reminds, yep.
And I'm just saying that you're absolutely right, that they run into that whole thing of, well, how am I going to pay all of these student loans, but at the same time, I need to work while I'm going to school, and it's patently unfair to work for free. Nobody should have to work for free, especially when you're in school in an industry that's already competitive to begin with, and so you need that extra edge there.
The one other thing I wanted to mention that we do at Merrill College through the local news network, we have an internship program in the summertime where interns are paid. We had 8 of them last summer at publications ranging from the Baltimore Sun to the paper in San Mateo, California. So that's a good opportunity too. And what we're really trying to do is, you know, get students doing local news after their sophomore year through this internship program.
Yeah,
and they get class credit for it too.
Correct.
Yeah, and the FIU Washington program is also paid. They get a stipend from the university and from some of the funders to come here, because it's obviously not cheap to be here. But even if it were cheap, they still shouldn't have to do it for free.
They still have to be paid. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a fundamental thing that we make sure, you know, we require our students to have an internship. They have to take one for credit. And we stand firm with organizations that you have to pay them. I mean, these are students who are trying to get through school. So without a doubt, you know, we have to do that, and we have to encourage people to support doing that. If someone calls me and says, well, this is not paid, then I said, well, it's not going to work for our students. DC
Right.
is very expensive to live
Right.
in, and these students are trying to make it. And if we want them to be good journalists, we want them to hone their skills. So we want them to have the opportunity to do it. So that goes without saying to people, if you're looking for interns, is this a paid internship? Because that's what these students are going to need, so that they can do the work and be able to move forward and not be caught with, I love to go, but I can't, you know, miss this or that. So I think that's one thing we have to stand firm about. And I think that's the thing for universities that we uniquely want to keep making sure people understand that. Because Gen Z does have a totally different experience. You know, they had the pandemic, and they're still reeling from this. This mental health stuff is very real for them and being set off. So they're still reeling from that. And then you're trying to pull them into something that, you know, journalism is not accounting. You don't get to go in a room and sit behind and not have to talk to anyone. In journalism, you get to go out there. So we're also building up who they are. You know, you're going to go ask Senator Mendez, why in the world do you have all this money in your house? And so you cannot be shy to be able to ask that and to stand there and say, that's still not the answer. You know, you got to give me something else. So you're teaching them that too. They're honing their skills, their character, which way they're going. And it's important because that's the whole point of a democracy, is we're all supposed to be able to function in it without things being hidden and taken away and limited and cordoned off. And we know that's a part of the history that we don't want to continue in this country. And the way to do that is to make sure people can get out here and keep people informed. But most importantly, they have to pay these students.
Yeah, and especially, and this, I think it's particularly annoying when they say, well, you're going to get credit for it. Well, so they're actually paying to work
Right, yeah. it's
for
just,
free,
you know, yeah,
which
doesn't go
which
together.
doesn't make any sense. And so the FIU program also says, you know, if it's not paid, you know, a lot of they don't even pay attention to it, and a lot of students, while they're here in the Washington semester program, will also do another internship like on the Hill, but they also get paid for it, you know. So it's just it just makes sense. Especially when you come from communities that cannot afford for your kid to go somewhere else to work for free.
Absolutely.
And that is particularly true with the students at FIU. Most of them come from middle class, working class, some are immigrant families, and I'm sure that a lot of them would love to have their kids come here, but if they can't afford it, they just, you know, it's not going to happen. And so the university makes sure that every kid that comes out here gets that stipend from the university and also has opportunities to do paid internships here, because no one can, not only should no one work for free, but it's particularly aggravating when it's communities that cannot afford it in the first place, and then they miss out.
Yeah.
You know, and that is a real key thing. When you're not here, you don't know what's going on,
Right.
and so everybody who has the money has the advantage over the people that don't, and that's where you run into a real desert of information, that the people that can cover it are not here because they can't afford it, and that's not fair.
Yeah.
And we want to push past, I mean, we have a large Pell Grant population, so that means basically these are people coming from family. That's the only way they're going to be able to go to school. And so they have to be able to be paid. And so this is work we do not just for their education, but their preparation, and also to support them and to tell people if it's not a paid internship, it's not going to work for them. And it's not fair. And you know, I don't support anyone who says, well, this will be a great internship. I'm sure it will, but if it's not paid, I can't promote that one.
Yeah, like
This is
you know,
unfair.
like I said, you know, the cause doesn't pay the bills, experience doesn't pay the bills. It's like when they would tell us as journalists, well, you'll get a kill fee. Well, who hires a plumber in the middle of a water leak in their house and say, well, let me make sure that I like your work first before I pay you? Nobody does that. But for some reason, that's okay in the journalism world, and that's something that needs to stop right away, because everybody, you know, needs to get paid, and especially when you're starting out. But you don't tell somebody, let me see your work first, and then I'll think about it. You know, that's ridiculous.
So speaking of Gen Z, somebody, well, not just Gen Z, but someone asked, younger journalists depend on texting and email. How do you convince them to do more in-person reporting?
Oh, yeah.
That's a requirement.
So, yeah.
You're required to
yeah.
do it, you know.
My Eudora Times reporters, it is a policy in our newsroom that the primary main source of the story, that interview has to be done in person.
Yeah.
Because of the lack of trust in journalism, especially in rural areas, because we were just beginning our outlet, it is absolutely required that they had to do for secondary interviews. I'm a little more lenient on the phone, but we are in that community, so they see us all the time.
Yeah,
Well,
same.
We're starting to do this semester for out-of-class assignments. Students are basically going to have to record interviews on Otter and include a link, so we can be sure that they're out there talking to people. And you know, I'm trying to do a few other little things tomorrow, or now too. Not tomorrow, Thursday. I'm just going to send my class across campus and say, find out what the students are talking about, and come back and write about it.
Yeah.
So that's important, and I think I take pride in the faculty. I hope they're looking today. They're at Howard, because they do force the students. We do the election project every midterm in 4 years, and these students have to go out. They have to go to the State House in Maryland. They have to go to Virginia. When they go and do stories across the campus, you have to go there. So we're all, you know, working with people who, again, it gets back, you know, I love connecting things, the passion and the commitment, and faculty are saying, I am challenging you to go do this. So I'm not picking on Mendez, but he just works right now. You have to go and be willing to stand out there and talk. You can't say, well, I saw this on the wire. No, you're going to have to be the one. You know, I remember when I first started off, and you know, places I would be sitting, and I was like, I can't believe I'm sitting here waiting and hoping I could catch this person. But that's the story, you know. And so we have to make sure students understand that that's part of it. The convenience and what the technology has allowed us to do on the digital platforms is fine, but I want you to be the good reporter. And so every time faculty challenges them to go out and be the good reporter, and someone says, there's one class I teach, and they said, well, can I look at it online? I was like, no, you've got to actually be there, because that's the nuance of it. That's when you're going to walk up to catch somebody walking out. That's when you catch them and get that question. And so then there are other times when we can say, oh, we're filling in and working the phones, as all of us have done when we're covering, you know, elections, and we're there. But you don't want them to lose the beauty of journalism, and that is, it is the boots on the ground.
Yeah.
It is going into the places. It is understanding. I mean, if you're talking about someone who's doing Meals on Wheels and you really want to say what they're doing for that community, you've got to be there when they're doing that. When they get there at 5 or 6 in the morning and they're doing it, that's when you have to talk to them. Not when it's a pretty picture, you know, standing in front of someone.
Right.
So without a doubt, that is one thing. It doesn't matter millennium, Generation Z, or whatever we want to say. We still have to make sure the true heart and value and commitment of journalism that they don't lose.
Another
Yeah.
thing I did last week, I took several of my students to the Prince George's County School Board meeting, where they seemed to be the only journalists. And it was a very heated discussion of all the problems with the bus routes in the Prince George's County schools. And so one of the speakers sits down after saying something very angry. My student leans over to me, says, "Should I go get her name?" I said, "Yeah." So she does. Next thing I know, all 4 students are circulating the room, finding the people who had spoken at the podium. Then they're pulling them out to interview them separately. And I just thought that was a beautiful moment. You know, you're getting them to do real journalism.
Yeah, and you have to be there in order to get that different perspective. You know, again, going back to who your audience is, if you're just watching something online, then you're watching what everybody else is watching and you're reporting on what you're seeing, not being there. And so you're not going to be able to go in person and say, okay, well, I need to follow up on this, or I need to ask somebody in the audience about this, or stake out somebody coming out of the hallway. And that you can't do that online. And I think we pushed the students, particularly after the pandemic, because a lot of them got used to, well, everything's on Zoom and I'll just, you know, talk to them on the computer. Well, that's fine for some things, but 99% of the time, especially thinking, how am I going to write this differently than everybody else, or how am I going to report on this differently than everybody else? You need to be there in person and just go for it. And you
Plus,
can't
get
do
more
that online.
sources that way too.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Someone asked, please talk about the work of high school students covering local subjects and programs that support this. I don't know if you're familiar with high school.
So I've had people come up to me for the last few years to suggest that we also work with Eudora's high school program. And I've briefly thought about it, but again, the challenge is I am doing this really as a volunteer.
Yeah.
And it's enough to manage my college team and all the hours I have to put into them without also. Now, I have used a high school student there to help us shoot sports every now and then to take photos for us, and that's worked pretty well. But it's the extra, it's the extra weight of taking on even more people that has prevented me. And because I edit every single piece before it goes up. So different from a student newspaper, we are different. You know, the students don't run the circus, I run the circus, right? Every single piece that goes up is vetted through me first. Because they're new, they're kids, right? I mean, they don't know what a mill rate is, right? And so I have to make sure that something that says 3 million, when really it should probably be 300 million. We should probably check on that, right? And so that is a step we don't have enough staffing to take on, is getting into that high school level yet.
AU has a summer program for high school students where they bring students from the local areas to sort of work as student reporters during the summer. And that's actually a very popular program. And I know that FIU in Miami does some of that too, down in Miami. So, and actually one of the more popular political websites out there was started by a kid who's now at Georgetown, in his bedroom when he was, I think in 8th or 9th grade, Wake Up to Politics. Every morning he puts it out. And he started it with just basically interest in what's going on in the news, and it turned into this really big thing after a lot of people heard about it. And if you go and check it out, it's actually very well written. I think he's now either a junior or a senior at Georgetown at the moment. So but he's a perfect example of somebody who just took it on himself and started writing about things and started linking to different things. And so that's another good example.
We do this thing. We have a summer program and summer journalism program, but we also, it's, set aside, for that particular reason. And then we had one faculty when she received her Kellogg grant, that's really what she did, partnering with Morgan State. And we had high school students who were working on health communication in Black and other minority or underserved communities. And so there are some opportunities. It's a little different with high school students. In terms of, as the university, you are basically, doing day-to-day with the college students you have. But these summer programs also give them an opportunity to come and participate in a way where you're kind of giving them some more connection and some more support to prepare. But a lot of these, the example you've given, a lot of these high school students are also very industrious. They've already started their podcast and they're doing similar things. And I think we can be in some ways sometimes, a support system for them as they move along. And especially if we have a summer program, then we have an opportunity to bring them in. And that's the way we have the connection sometimes.
Couple more questions. We're gonna have to speak a little faster.
Yeah.
Okay. How do your programs work with your campus papers? Is there a cross-pollination?
Very quickly, the Hilltop is our campus paper, founded by Zora Neale Hurston and a couple others. And it's separate from the school itself, but most of our students also write on it and many times serves in the leading editing positions. And they also have student media across the campus because we have a commercial radio station and we have WHUT, which is a PBS station. So these students, and we have an online radio, Glasshouse Radio. So our students get tentacles in many places.
Okay.
Yeah, it's similar at Maryland. Our school newspaper, the Diamondback, is entirely independent from us and does a great job. And several of the students who work in my class on the local news network are also doing things at the Diamondback at the same time. And we also have WAMU radio. We have various other outlets for students as well, all independent. And the industrious students take advantage of the ones that appeal to them.
Yeah, and the same thing with American University. Had the Eagle newspaper is completely independent from the school. In fact, they were the ones that broke the story that was later picked up by local news on how during the pandemic, AU had gotten a batch, paid a lot of money for it, a batch of defective masks. And to this day, the administration has not said anything about it because the school newspaper picked it up and then the local media picked it up. And so the same thing with the FIU, there's the Panther News, and there's a lot of interaction with the website, with the newspaper, with the radio stations, a little bit of everything, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we operate very separately. So I encourage students to work for the student newspaper first to get 2 years of grounding under them. You need to be a junior before you can work for the Eudora Times.
Okay. All right, two more. Could you talk about your advertising models, what has worked and what has not?
Well, for the Hilltop, again, which is independent and separate, they have a board, a Hilltop policy board, and some of our faculty on that, and some of our advertising faculty sits on that with them, helping them work and recommending ways for them to package and get advertising for the school paper, even though it's really not under us. But they do get support from that Hilltop policy board of people who volunteer to serve on that board.
Well, we don't really have advertising. What our local news network stories do, they appear on what's called the Capitol News Service website. Capitol News Service is our wire service. We've had it for 30 years. We have a Washington bureau, an Albany or Annapolis bureau, a digital bureau, a reader engagement bureau, and so it's a very nice website that you won't have any pop-up ads to worry about if you decide to go there. It's cnsmaryland.org.
Yeah, same thing with the Eagle news paper and the Panther News. No advertising per se, but it's the same sort of thing as the Maryland model.
So as I mentioned, I was the ad director, publisher, editor, social media editor, webmaster. I'm a weekly gal. You do all the things. So I sold the advertising when we did, and so in rural communities, print advertising is something they understand. It's something that my business community really wanted, was to buy print ads. And so, I mean, they were eager when we finally did that. Because we do a special printed section every semester, usually about a theme. So Panasonic is building a $4 billion plant right now, right outside Eudora, which is going to have a tremendous impact on my community. And so we did a special section about Panasonic. We did a special section about the 50th anniversary of Title IX, examining the history of Eudora sports from 100 years ago down to athletes in 1972. We found alumni. We interviewed girls on the current basketball and volleyball teams. We interviewed little pee-wee girls who were in 5th grade about what sports means to them. So those special sections we have no problem selling ads for. We're doing 3 or 4 ad products now. Just in the last year, finally, I have gotten the strategic communication side of my university to cough up and get some students interested. So I now have 3 PR and advertising students working for me who are killing it. They were texting me 100 times yesterday during their meeting. And so that has been a huge help, because there is money to be had there for advertising. I just need the help to have students to also do that.
Okay. And then what do you think about the idea of funding local news through the government? Should that play a role or no?
So I actually want to bring that up. So you mentioned earlier my book, Reviving Rural News, which I just finished from my hotel yesterday. Thank you. Coming out next year. So we did surveys of rural residents in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas. And it was actually surprising how many readers, residents are open to the idea of taxpayer funding for journalism. It was significant. I mean, it was, at least about 60% were open to it or would consider it. So this is what my whole book is about, is the disconnect between what readers say they're willing to fund for journalism and the 1800s, I'm a journalism historian, the 1800s created business model that we continue to operate under today, right? So our industry historically has felt, objectivity, distance, freedom of the press, right? But you know what? It works in Europe to have government funding, right? So now I don't see our industry doing this anytime soon, but it was fascinating to me to see that readers were open to it.
Interesting.
There are a couple of interesting experiments nationwide in this right now. In California, which is a huge pot of money to do this, and on a smaller scale in New Mexico. I think that whether or not this is a good idea depends on how it's structured. I think that, for example, if you were to have a public service program in your state where young people go and work for a year in a Report for America type role, I think that would be quite good. If it was something like a direct subsidy, I would be worried that that subsidy would disappear as soon as a tough story hit the wire.
Yeah, and expanding on that a little bit, that has been the perfect example of disinformation and misinformation when you have people up in Capitol Hill and Congress saying, well, we need to get rid of funding for NPR and PBS and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It is such a fraction of the funding that they get otherwise, but most people don't know that, because all they hear is, oh, well, my money's going for something about 2 girls kissing and some LGBT thing over here, and a story about a teen suicide, controversial types of reporting. And every time you turn on the radio and listen to an NPR pledge, they always say, we get just a tiny amount from the government. But even that is controversial, because the lack of information of how that works. And when you mention it works in Europe, well, everybody in the UK sends a percentage of their taxes to the BBC. And no one has really said anywhere that the BBC is opinionated news about things. And actually WAMU from midnight to 5 a.m. has an entire block of just the live BBC every single day. and is considered a well-respected organization. But here, because of the misinformation and the disinformation and the lack of information about how it works, it's not going to be a good model, simply because the folks who want to spread that kind of thing have basically hijacked the topic.
Interesting.
Structurally, it would be the challenge of that, you know, how much they push back against NPR, and will they be able to not stick their hands in it in the way that they try to stick it in there now. And, you know, we have such an important job to continue with journalism, pushing back on this misinformation and disinformation, and you know things that are at Axios, you know things that are going on down at Pointer, trying to make sure people are being trained, the Talk Straight that's going on, trying to help newsrooms prepare people to really inform people. And they have so much information now that that's the role that journalism plays, is to help them sift through that. So that would be my concern, is the structure of it. Would it be, you know, this pendulum hanging every time, oh, you're going to talk about, you know, people paint their toenails pink. Oh, no, well, then we don't want to cover that. We don't want to pay for that. I want my money back. And that's not how it works.
Yeah.
You know, we can't call the local county and say, well, they put green grass on this side of the road and rocks on that side, and I want my money back. We can't do that with the structure of our lives, so we can't do that with the press.
Right.
They can't pull it back when they get mad because something they don't like.
Right.
But
and
that they
should.
certainly try.
Yes. But
That's always the challenge. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm afraid we're out of time, but I really appreciate all
fast.
4 of you
Yes.
talking about this important topic, and all of you for coming and listening. We are going to have 2 other panels this year on News Desert, so I hope you can come for that. But thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you.